Good afternoon. Y'all got to do better. Good afternoon. We got to make sure that the class knows that we're more exciting than what's happening inside there. We want them to be looking about what's happening. Thank you so much for the warm introduction, Dr. Roden. Again, I am Tiffany Davis. I use she, her pronouns, and I am within the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy Studies. I'm very excited to be the kickoff speaker for the Pathways to Equity and the Dynamics of Change lecture series. As I was preparing for today's lecture, I was most energized by the fact that I get to be the first one. So you all have no expectations of what's gonna happen. So we will really be able to have a really good conversation that will set the stage for the continuing lectures throughout the semester. So before we begin, I want to get a sense of who's in the room and what are some of the reasons that you chose to attend today's lecture. Don't everyone speak at once. Anyone? Yes.
I'm making grades. I'm a doctoral candidate in the College of Education. Dr. Davis is the co-chair of my committee. That's one reason I'm here.
Bonus points.
I used to sit at the feet of this genius every day and learn and grow. And so I'm always looking to improve my work, my knowledge, so that's why I'm here.
Thank you, Megan. Anyone else? Why are you here today? Yeah.
I'm here. I'm a senior. I'm currently major in social sciences.
Okay.
And I feel like my education has been surrounded around like healthcare and science, and I see equity in those lenses.
Absolutely.
I learn about how equity is in all lenses, all perspectives beyond healthcare, such as education.
Absolutely. So much we hear about health equity, and I know there's several lectures for the rest of the semester, but it is definitely intersectional in nature. So thank you. Yes.
I'm a student myself as well in
Hi.
the same course.
Okay.
Regarding policy and administration, and I find it interesting myself. I am in my third year.
Okay.
As a pre-medical student, I find how the construct of equity itself in higher education has that sort of almost like domino.
Yes.
Students thus pursuing the industry and thus enter the industry itself.
Yes.
And how that disperses, I guess, to the constituents. So I find that remarkable.
Absolutely. Y'all have taken the last part of my lecture, and I talk about educational equity is just one aspect of a student's ecosystem, and we have to look at all of these other areas and how they converge. So thank you. Anyone else? Why did you plan to attend today? Looking at this side of the room. Yes.
I'm a senior. I'm in the class, the policy and admin class.
Okay.
I joined because I'm interested in doing a graduate degree in public administration
Okay.
and working overseas, specifically in Kenya because I have an opportunity over there.
Okay.
But something that I'm interested in, but also I father my family and my African family. Something that they're interested in also is how education works over there because they have a system that is not designed to benefit them. So they go to college, they rack up all this debt if they're able to go to college.
Right.
Because their system works a lot different from ours.
Yeah.
But then most people who get a degree are not able to use that degree and hold a job.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting how there's different systems and equity has to be approached differently in those systems. So I'm interested in the American side, but also the
Thank you. I think you bring up a really good point about how much context matters. And that's why I titled this In American Higher Education, because systems of higher education, of schooling, look very different. Even within I should have probably said North American, because we know that America is just not this place. And so even North American higher education looks very different. And so I think some of what you hear today when we talk about issues of access and opportunity will be transferable, but then as you go to Kenya, you'll be able to fully explore that more. So thank you. All right, so we had a good number of folks. So thank you for sharing. So journey back with me in time. Does anyone know what's represented in this picture? I wouldn't have been able to pick it out either, so don't worry. This is Harvard University. Harvard is the oldest institution in American higher education. We say that this is the first college. It was founded in 1636, and Harvard was a colonial college, which meant that it was founded during the American Revolution. And colonial colleges had small enrollments, and they were very limited in scope. Students studied classical curriculum of religion, literature, arts, and some sciences. They were primarily founded for religious purposes and generally enrolled less than 100 students, white young men. These were white young men who were groomed for either the clergy or the government. Think Alexander Hamilton. He graduated from King's College, which is modern-day Columbia. And so the colonial colleges were elite and exclusionary. It took nearly 200 years before a co-educational institution granted a college degree to a woman, and that was in 1831 at Mississippi College, and for Oberlin College to be the first college to admit Black students in 1835. 7 of the 9 colonial colleges became 7 of the 8 modern-day Ivy League institutions: Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Brown, to kind of name a few. Schools that are still recognized as elite and exclusionary today. It's impossible for us to contextualize educational equity without understanding the historical context of American higher education. It's also important to recognize that the issues of educational equity are experienced across the educational pipeline and are the result of historical and contemporary exclusionary practices based on race, ethnicity, socioeconomic class, gender, physical or mental abilities, and other social identity variables and intersectionalities. These practices produce disparate experiences and outcomes and leaky pathways to education. So let's look at some secondary education data. According to the Texas Education Agency, across the 5 largest racial ethnic groups in the class of 2021, the 4-year graduation rate was highest for Asian students at 96.7%, followed by white students, 93.8%, multiracial, 90.8%, Hispanic, 88.1%, and African American students at 86.3%. 7. The 4-year graduation rate for students not identified as economically disadvantaged in the class of 2021 was 93.7%, 7 percentage points higher than rate for students identified as economically advantaged. For the same class of 2021, the 4-year graduation rates for students in special education program was only 79.7%. And for students who identified as emergent bilingual students or English learners in grades 9 through 12, 80% were lower than the state average. The dropout rate for these 2 groups were higher than the state average by 8.7% and 12.2% respectively. So what happens when these students get to college? Well, first they have to get here. According to the College Board's Higher Education Pays report, among students with TOPS test scores, virtually all students in the top half of family income distribution enroll in post-secondary education, but only 80% of those in the lowest fifth of the income distribution continue their education after high school. Moreover, Black and Hispanic students of traditional college age are less likely to enroll in post-secondary institutions compared to their white and Asian peers. And then once they get over all those hurdles and barriers to matriculate into college, here are some of the facts. First-generation students are less likely to graduate on time. Black and Hispanic community college students are more likely to enroll part-time or stop out at least once. Students from underserved backgrounds are more likely to face basic needs insecurity. So we're talking food, we're talking housing. First-generation students earn less than their peers after graduation, and Black students graduate with more debt. I'd like to hear from you all. What are some of the reasons that you have seen, heard, or believe are factors in these outcomes? I want to give y'all some time. So I'm going to say think. We're going to do the think, pair, share. So you're going to think to yourself, then pair up. So that way people are building up their courage to be able to speak to the group. Okay. So I want you to think about what are some of the reasons where we see about graduation rates, dropout rates, enrollment, matriculation. What are some of the things that you have seen, heard, or believe factor into some of these outcomes? Take about 1 minute to think, and then pair up with some folks who are sitting near you to have a little conversation. All right, let's come back together. So what are some of the factors that you, I see people are being voluntold to represent their group. What are some of the factors that you have seen, heard, or believe about these, like why these statistics are real? Anyone? Yes. Yeah.
So I would consider myself a first-gen student.
Okay.
My parents didn't go to college in the States,
Mhm.
so they had like no idea of how the system works. So I had to do a lot of things on my own, and I imagine that for people who are in similar situations, it can be really hard for them to find resources and connections that would help them, apply to college, navigate financial aid resources, so they don't have to spend much.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So I'm going to repeat out because I also want to make sure that I have a speaker. It gets a little bit louder. But what I heard was parental knowledge, and that there are some students that may have a lack of access to folks who know how to navigate the systems, to be able to provide insight and advice for how to get through financial aid processes, admissions, even just the college experience. You also bring up a really good point that I was talking to Dr. Kennedy just yesterday about the first generation moniker. And so for people that may not know, first generation is typically reserved for a group of people who their parents have not had a baccalaureate education. So neither parent has. But there's also this group of folks who, especially folks who are immigrants, like, what if your parents had degrees from other educational systems that operate very differently? But then it's like, oh, but your parents have degrees. You're not first generation, but there still can be some gaps in that knowledge and stuff. So we have to think holistically about that first generation moniker as well. So I appreciate you doing that. So parental knowledge, lack of resources, navigation, cultural, social capital I hear in there. Anyone else? Yeah. And then we'll go back there.
Disparities that are present like early on in childhood education.
Okay.
So the lack of exposure to books from the very beginning in children, and whenever they begin reading in kindergarten, or even just being exposed to books in kindergarten through elementary school.
Okay.
Even identifying the book, we agreed that that was also like considered a luxury for the students, because
Yeah.
the lack of exposure to reading and the alphabet creates that foundation that it's vital to be constructed from the beginning. However, that factor already there being present lends itself to further communication.
Yeah. So here we're talking about like scaffolded education, right? If you don't know how to read and write, it's very hard to get the next lesson in doing that. And so that there are environments where everyone doesn't have same access to be able to learn those skills. We know that we have early intervention. So think about like Head Start is a very popular early childhood intervention that people can have access to. I think about how many baby showers I go to these days. And every baby shower, somebody gets the book by Eric Carle. Does anyone know? See, the people that have done too many baby showers, we're like, we've all seen that caterpillar. We've all seen that caterpillar, right? And so, but I'm like, I never had that book. There were a lot of books that I just didn't have growing up in that same way. So that early intervention is super important. In the back. Yeah.
Oh yeah, so I'd say that a big factor is the resources in the institution. So some institutions have a ton of money, a ton of state-of-the-art computers and all that stuff for the students.
Yeah.
That makes a big difference because it's not even in higher education; it's also in just normal public education
Absolutely.
for communities and stuff. Some schools don't even have textbooks in most of them. That's a big issue. Like it should.
Yes. So I hear the digital divide, both for on the individual level, in terms of that students don't always have access to technology, the most up-to-date technology, Wi-Fi. I mean, even graduate students that I primarily work with, I've navigated working with students that are like, well, Dr. Davis, I don't have Wi-Fi in my house. And at first I was like, what? You just don't often think about that. There may not be students that have reliable Wi-Fi. I think about during Hurricane Harvey, I moved to Houston 2 weeks before Hurricane Harvey. And I remember when we were coming back and everything, what they were talking about, how they had to do the HISD, like mobile buses to go and sit in communities so that way those students would have access. The same with the pandemic. The pandemic also exposed a lot of the ways that technology is not the same. And to your point about it's not just individual, it's schools. Some schools don't have textbooks. I remember we had to carry and lug those suckers around on my back. That's probably why I have issues today, carrying all those books, and they're like, oh, we don't have books. Or they have to share books. Or the books are outdated. They're not, they're not in good condition. So those are also other things that we see that can contribute. And so those are system level issues because those are connected to funding. Thank you. Over here? Yeah.
It's going to connect to like pretty much both things.
Sure.
But like, when you said like why some students have to do like part-time and still go to school and go to work, which kind of like extends the time they have to graduate. So like getting an idea of like what financial aid does.
Yeah.
So sometimes they can cover a certain amount and then the rest you have to either do like a work study
Yeah.
or work to end up covering for books, or there's certain amounts you can get. So if a student has to do that and
Right.
also do school at the same time, it becomes like very overwhelming for them,
Yeah.
which technically is the time that they have to graduate. By the time, let's say, everyone knows like the big white collar jobs that
Yeah.
doctors, engineers, the ones that will give you money.
Mm-hmm.
Then the ones who won't give you money, which is what the student wants to do,
Yeah.
but everyone keeps putting in your head, you won't get a job afterwards.
Yeah.
You'll be in so much debt. But even if you want to get a job, you still have to go to more school. And more school, graduate school, PhD, whatever, that's more debt. So which makes people end up just drop out or just
Yeah.
go into like a family business. Because
Mhm.
then the family's like, why don't you just do this? Why don't you
Right.
just do this? And then you end up just giving them new dreams.
So you kind of surface a couple of issues of one around multiple responsibilities, and that students today, especially even in high school, in middle school, are taking on more responsibility in the household in terms of having to work to help pay for bills because y'all, inflation, okay? If you want an egg sandwich, you have to work hard for an egg sandwich these days because inflation has become a thing and our wages aren't keeping pace. So you have more families, especially one of the things about the University of Houston is a lot of our students live in multi-generational households and so are helping to be caretakers, whether that's for a younger family or for aging families. We also have a large population of first generation students in our population, and so they may be working to cover the cost of education. And like you said, books are expensive. The experiences of networking and all those other pieces to help you get that good job can also come at a cost. And so how are students navigating the cost of that? And then it's the trade-off. I know for me, I'm like, okay, I knew I wanted education, and then what I wanted to do, which was this job, I needed a master's degree. So I was like, okay, I took out loans for undergrad, now I have to take out loans for my master's program. Then I was like, you know what, it sure would be nice to be a doctor. And what I wanted to do in education, it was helpful to have a PhD. And so I was like, okay, am I willing to take on this, knowing that education is a quote unquote, if you look and think, a low status field. That means that our pay isn't gonna be always like the engineers and like the doctors and stuff. And so I had to balance, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna take on this debt knowing that it's gonna take a little bit more time for me to pay it off. So definitely another factor. And so that's not only the individual financial, but also the system of college affordability, of financial aid processes. You know, we're right in the middle of that right now with student loan forgiveness. And so there's individual and the system level. Anyone else want to add what they were talking about? That they identified as some factors? Anyone else? Yes. Hello.
I think also the attitude that college is treated through, depending on your environment, really matters. I went from
Okay.
But I went to one of like the more impoverished elementary and middle schools.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I went to high school, I was able to go to a magnet school, which was like if you're lucky and you're one of the good ones, you can get like better books and and things like that. And
Yeah.
going from one of like the more low income schools to one of the highest income schools in the district was an insane way, because it went from, oh, you're gonna go to college, like, you know,
Yeah.
the smart, you know, the smart person, or
Mhm.
the smart kids, like you're gonna go to college, and everybody's like, you know, you're lucky if you pass the STAR test.
Right.
And then you go to a school where everyone is expected to go to college. And it's not even like to go to college like Ivy League, you know, like people, you know, type of situation.
Yeah.
So it's like the people I went to, you know, I grew up with, college was not always like given, like that's something I'm going to do, because it was never implemented, and like that is something that's imperative for you to
Yeah.
do, and that's something that's necessary for you know your life, or something that's good for you. Or like they didn't even make it seem like it was something that they could do.
Yeah.
So you know, I'll also.
And so you have, that was a lot in there, and that was a good transition to my next kind of comments, but you kind of surfaced three things. One, about the funding and sourcing for public education at the secondary rank, is that some schools are funded really well, and they're able to have the latest technology, certain magnet programs. And so it creates this system of the haves and the have-nots, right? So why is it that only certain students get access to rigorous curriculum that's going to ensure that they're college ready, or that they're going to have the professors and the teachers and the counselors that are going to tell them about all of their college options, and not kind of tracking them in, say, you know what, I think community college is where you're going to go. Or you're going to go, how about let's look at only careers? And so it really sets up that situation. Then you talk about early awareness of college readiness, in terms of there are some people, I identify as a first generation student. And I say I identify that way because some people, my dad has a bachelor's degree, but we were all in college at the same time. So me, my older brother, and my father graduated one semester apart from each other. And so in real life, people are like, oh, well, you're not first generation. I'm like, we had 3 different college experiences. My dad's a military disabled veteran who went to night school. He either had class at 5 a.m. or 10 p.m. at night because he worked during the day. So that was his schooling in town. My brother went to an in-state school. He started in HBCU, then was a transfer student. And I was like, I'm not staying in Alabama. I got to go. And I went to the University of Tennessee, and I was in the honors program. Shout out to the Honors College. And so I was in the honors program. We had very different trajectories. And so even though, yes, my father has a thing, I had to navigate a lot of different things on my own. And we didn't have that knowledge because we were all just trying to figure it out together about financial aid and all of those things. And so there's also that, when did I know? I went to a magnet school. But I don't remember, like, for real talking about college, because I remember when I was a junior miss, yes, I was in a pageant, and in the pageant booklet in April of my senior year in high school, my college choice was undecided. I went to a magnet program, one of the first in its kind in the state of Alabama. I was in the law magnet, and I was undecided as a senior, enough so to write that down in something that lives in perpetuity, that I was undecided. And so then I'm starting to realize, did I really have the college preparation that I thought I had, or was I just college ready from an academic standpoint? And then I think the last thing you talk about is this idea around that people had expectations, and that teachers and people said, you're going to college and you're not. You have to go this way. And so those are all very important and are factors. And so thank you first for sharing, because you all highlighted the rest of my lecture. So I think we're almost free to go. Just a little bit more. So I asked the question of why. Let me scroll back up. When some people look at these data, they see achievement gaps, and others correctly identify them, kind of like what you all were talking about, as equity gaps. The Education Advisory Board, the EAB, urges that an achievement gap implies that the student is responsible for the disparate outcome, that they failed to achieve something, that therefore there exists a gap. Alternatively, instead of asking what did the student do wrong, acknowledging a disparity as an equity gap implies leaders working together to ask What processes, policies, strategies, etc., did the institution put in place that created or exacerbated these disparities by race, gender, socioeconomic class, etc.? So what exactly is equity? This is a very popular graphic that depicts the difference between equality and equity. Two kids are trying to enjoy the baseball game, yet there's a fence in there that's blocking their view. So equality assumes that everyone would benefit from the same supports. So each kid is given a block to stand on. Everyone is not enjoying the game to the same degree or at all. Alternatively, in achieving equity, everyone gets the support they need to be able to enjoy the baseball game. More recently, I saw an updated graphic that provides a more nuanced view of this same concept. Reality, equality, equity, and liberation. The reality is that some people have had years, decades, and centuries of earned and unearned access and privilege due to pervasive racism, sexism, ableism, classism, and heterosexism, etc. Segregated school systems, under-resourced schools, uneven teacher quality, lack of access to public support systems, inaccessible facilities, stereotypes, bias, and discrimination. The reality is that there is no even playing field. So equality simply does not work. Equity is necessary until liberation and justice is achieved, where the systemic barriers are removed. So as you see in liberation, there is no fence because we've gotten to the root causes of why people need to enjoy their baseball game. So what does equity mean? According to the UC Berkeley Initiative for Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity, equity is the guarantee of fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement, while at the same time striving to identify and eliminate barriers that have prevented the full participation of some groups. The principle of equity acknowledges that there are historically underserved and underrepresented populations, and that fairness regarding these unbalanced conditions is needed to assist equality in the provision of effective opportunities to all groups. According to the National Equity Project, educational equity means that each student receives what they need to develop to their full academic and social potential. Nelson Mandela said education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Not only is there a widespread belief in the power of education for reducing economic inequality and increasing opportunity and social mobility in America, but also interrogating systemic barriers to broad college access is a matter of national importance because of the public benefit that is derived from a diverse and better educated citizenry needed to meet workforce needs and ensure national and global competitiveness. So now that we know what educational equity is and why it's important, what does it involve? How might we do that? So for today's purpose, I want to use the framework of the National Equity Project that outlines what working towards equity involves. The lecture series talked about highlighting some promising practices and strategies that people are dealing with this, because it's nice to know what it means, but what are people doing? This is just a sampling of some of the things that people are doing for educational equity. So first, working towards educational equity involves ensuring equally high outcomes for all participants in our educational system, removing the predictability of success or failures that currently correlates with any social or cultural factors. One of the best ways to do this entails being data-driven. It entails making strategic decisions based on the information and data that you have available. I am advocating for socially just research and assessment practices that disaggregate data to better identify and call attention to patterns of inequity that may be present in student outcomes. So we're going to talk about my college. I did not know that this was going to be recorded. So my college is the College of Education. So when I became, this is good old Farish Hall, when I became the associate dean in the college, I started September 1st, 2022. So I'm still new in my role. Hopefully after this lecture, I'll keep my job. Okay. I asked for our college scorecard. And so I wanted to specifically look at the college's retention rate for first-year students to their second year. And then I wanted to look at the graduation rate, 4-year and 6-year, because these are, if you aren't familiar, these are kind of the key metrics that people use. So first of all, I am happy to report that our college is faring very well in both the retention and the 6-year graduation rate. We are above the universities and national rates for retention and 6-year graduation. So just in case you want to know, for graduation, nationally is 64%, UH is at about 63%, and the College of Education is proudly at 69%. For retention, nationally it's about 82%, and then UH is at 85%, and the College of Education is at 83%. So we are doing well. I could have stopped there, but instead I wanted to look deeper at our student demographics. And then from looking deeper, what I saw that while our college retention rate is 83%, our Black, Hispanic, Pell eligible, so those from economically disadvantaged groups, and male students are not being retained at that high of a level. So I have to think about, this is what my job is now. I'm like, we can go with these college things that says we're doing really good, but now I have to start asking questions about, well, what is it about the systems, the processes, the policies that make it so that we're not retaining our Hispanic and Black students at the same rate? What's happening? Our male retention rate is actually pretty low, considerably. They're probably the most out of that group. We retain a lot more of our female students than we do males. So equity-mindedness ensures that all students reap the benefits of education. So now that I'm aware, I can use these data to help inform my next steps. Being data-driven allows us as higher education leaders to be proactive, to make more confident decisions, and to better steward human, material, and financial resources, all in service to better supporting student success. This flows into their next step. Working towards equity in education involves interrupting inequitable practices, examining biases, and creating inclusive multicultural school environments for adults and children. System problems require system solutions. In a report for the American Association of Colleges and Universities, scholars argue that being equity-minded involved being conscious of the ways that higher education, through its practices, policies, expectations, and unspoken rules, places responsibility for student success on the very groups that have experienced marginalization, rather than on the institutions whose responsibility it is to remedy these marginalizations. So how do we remove barriers and provide the appropriate support to support students? And as the AACU states, how can we ensure that excellence is inclusive? It's so easy to label students as being at risk, rather than acknowledging the systems that are shaping these outcomes, and instead articulating that students have and continue to be underserved, marginalized, and excluded. So for example, there's a lot of research about standardized testing to the point that point to the bias inherent in the standardized testing process, as well as their low predictive properties for student success. So as we know, many schools have started to enact their equity focus by moving to either test optional standards or broadening the availability of kind of testing waivers. Consider also the TSI. How many folks had to go through TSI? If you're a student, you do, yeah, right? So TSI Assessment is the Texas Success Initiative that helps colleges determine if students are college ready in math, reading, and writing. Now people are like, oh yeah, I remember that. I had to be TSI complete. I attended a symposium just last semester that talked about how they're already rethinking how can we have multiple measures to assess whether a student is college ready than relying on a single test or a single measurement. The same is true for admission standards broadly. Colleges and universities have moved away from staking all of their admission decisions on GPA and test scores to more holistic admission standards and integrating non-cognitive variables, such as positive self-concept, meaning that students are able to demonstrate confidence, strength of character, determination, independence, or realistic self-appraisal, which means that they're able to recognize and accept their strengths and deficiencies, especially academic, and works hard at self-development. There's also leadership experience, talking about how do students demonstrate strong leadership in any area, whether that's sports, non-educational groups, church, gang leaders, etc. Realizing that leadership happens in many, many contexts and not just from being a part of a club at a school. And then lastly, these are some of the variables that have been advocated for over 30 years. If you want to read more about that, Dr. William Sedlicek is one of the leading researchers that started this idea around non-cognitive variables. Lastly, the UM4 program is a really good example of a program that has an equity focus in the face of mounting concerns over college affordability and access for lower income students. The UM4 program was created, as they said, quote, to simplify the process for students to earn both a high quality and affordable education. The UM4 program is a partnership between the university and the students to support graduation within 4 years. And it really provides a comprehensive plan to help students navigate their 4-year college experience. And this goes back to where we talked about, is like college knowledge, parental knowledge, how to navigate, where the UM4 is saying we're looking at that financial barriers and processes and also college knowledge and helping students navigate. So what these examples demonstrate is that educators and leaders are looking at the policies, practices, and systems they uphold as sites of change. These changing practices are providing access, broadening opportunities, and making real impact in the lives of students and families. Lastly, the National Equity Project working towards educational equity involves discovering and cultivating the unique gifts, talents, and interests that every human possesses. In response to stereotypes and bias that are often perpetuated in the classroom related to students of color and other marginalized populations, scholars have spent a lot of time exploring culturally responsive and culturally sustaining pedagogies. These teaching methods and practices are those that view cultural differences as more of assets rather than the barriers. They're looking at honoring students' experiences, their identities, their ways of knowing, their ways of being, their ways of learning. They're all centered to support students as empowered and lifelong critical thinkers and lifelong learners. There is a nascent, culturally responsive higher education curriculum assessment tool that is developed by leaders at Allen Hancock College in California that attempts to bring these ideas into the post-secondary space. And this is a tool that allows faculty members to be able to reflect on their curriculum in the following ways. They are asking faculty through this tool to look at their syllabi, look at the classroom practices and activities, and say, let's look at representation. How does your class have a diversity of individuals who are represented? What are the diversity of authors, the diversity of portrayals of life experiences, of pathways? How are people represented, cultures and communities, and how is that done well? They're also looking at it from the social justice aspect, is that it's not just enough to acknowledge people's and students' human experience, but it's also to start getting them to think about, how do we think about power, privilege, and oppression? How do I navigate the world? What are the systems that keep this in practice? But then, what is the action behind it? What do I do next? What is the ways that the system, and how can I inform the system? And so a real active orientation. And lastly, while these focus on strategies and methods, others advocate for humanizing education. Randy Weiner, in an EdSurge opinion piece, talked about we need to humanize education more than personalized learning. He argues that it may be time, quote, it may be time to focus on how to humanize rather than personalize our perception of students and their education and ultimately ourselves. For him, he says, humanizing education asks the questions, did I see my students today for who they are and who they can be? And would my students know that? Did I make a new connection or deepen an existing relationship with my students today? How would each of my students know that I truly care about them? Did I demonstrate my own humanity to my students today? And did I do anything today to oppress a student's humanity? And how can I be sure? So these are just some of the questions that as educational leaders, as equity-minded leaders, we should be sitting with and thinking about as we're continuing. So I want to ask the question, I highlighted just a few, but what are some of the programs, services, and aspects of the UH experience have you experienced that you believe have an equity focus? And for those who are faculty, you can also think about things that you may do in your own classroom as well that might also exemplify an equity focus. Yes.
Particularly sure if it's a formal organization.
Okay.
But I do know that there are food banks available, I believe 24. I'm not sure. I do know they're very flexible and they accommodate students
Mm-hmm.
who are not necessarily on meal plans or who need that access to resources. And I think that is a wonderful way to accommodate the further disparities that may impact post-secondary education.
Absolutely. So we have two. We have the Cougar Cupboard, which is a university-wide food pantry, and there's also the Peeps Pantry, or now called Cougar Cupboard 2, that is in the College of Education. That's also open to all students on campus as well, where we have folks that are volunteering to staff the pantry, and they help provide opportunities for students to get resources they need. Absolutely. Good example. What are some other examples? I didn't talk about all of them so that y'all could bring them up too. Yeah. Okay. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. They do. Yeah, at the 80 Bruce Religion Center, there is opportunity for conversations around spiritual topics and food and fellowship. And you mentioned the Career Center and the Job Fair. They also offer a career closet. And so if you want to, if you need or want to borrow and look at what they have in the black and the navy and the business professional suits, you can go in there and be able to borrow outfits as you're interviewing for opportunities. Also, I don't think it's passed yet already for this semester, but they always do that JCPenney, like, get jazzed up and dress, because those offer like a 30 or 40% discount to students on professional wear. And so also a really good way of saying, we understand that this is what your college and career is going to need, but how do we do that at a more affordable rate? How do we make sure that this is not the barrier to you saying, I have a job, I am qualified, I am gonna rock, and I need to razzle dazzle. So I need to razzle dazzle over to the career closet and find me an outfit. So those are the opportunities. So definitely. Any other ones? Yeah.
Well, on a more kind of personal, particular level,
Sure.
something you did, which is how to get into groups and then share. That's something that I do in classes sometimes, and it seems equitable in the sense that it gives people who are a little more shy and maybe like myself, a little slower thinker and have to ponder things a little bit, a chance to contribute and feel more comfortable doing so. So it's really cool that you did.
Absolutely. I always say I am an external processor. So if I'm going to talk it out to myself. I have an app. And so I'm going to talk it out to myself, and I will be like, hey, it's me. I need to talk. But realizing that some people do need a moment to just sit and reflect. So honoring people's different ways of processing and what types of learners. So usually if we were in another space, I would probably have you, I like to use cook candy. I like to use props and activities because I'm like, also there's kinesthetic learners. So really attending to that is a way that we can promote equity in the classroom. Thank you. Anyone else? This, and then we'll go back over here. Sure.
One message that I believe is very, has been observed by all students and faculty on campus, but it might not be as obvious of a factor, is the availability of voting for our Harris County residents and students here.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Encouragement and having, a say in what really dictates our experience and
Absolutely.
around education and post-secondary education.
Yeah.
Of course, and the lack of that availability would have not allowed for voting otherwise for those particular groups of people.
Absolutely. That is a really good example. And it was not on my list of things that I thought about. So thank you for bringing that up, because it also is like telling people that and not everyone grew up in political households. Like, as growing up, I don't remember, again, my mom is not going to see this either. I don't remember my parents ever going to vote. I'm sure they did, right? I was at school, I was at cheerleading, I was at work somewhere, but I don't remember, that wasn't a family experience for us. We didn't talk about politics, and so it wasn't until I went to a college campus, and I appreciate that you have these reminders of like, what does voter participation, because when we think about educational equity, it's so intersected that voting is one of the best ways, is like, vote with your feet. Like, you gotta go and you gotta make your voice heard, so thank you. Any other one? Yeah.
I was going to say the Disabilities Center on campus.
Absolutely.
Epilepsy, so that has helped me. They introduce the scholarships, they accommodate people, whether it be with headphones or standardized tests, and you get to have a quiet center and take the test, and you get extra time, and it's very nice. It's not all schools like my high school did that.
Yeah, I think, and that's a really good point, because not all centers and not all universities often think about both visible and invisible disabilities, including chronic health conditions, even temporary. I remember when I was on my other campuses where there were folks who were pregnant, and I'm like, have you talked to Disability Services? And they were like, what? I'm like, technically, we're not going to talk about the patriarchy and all of this, what it means, okay? But pregnancy is a temporary disability, right? And so I'm like, there are some things that you can take advantage of while you're having to navigate this. And so our Disability Services Center is a really good, and I know they recently changed their name, so I apologize. But they have a really good opportunities, and I really like the model that we have here, where it's a partnership in helping students to be able to self-advocate as well. Any last ones? Yeah.
Exactly, before I finish,
Okay.
I was in the Office Mentorship Program last year, and so what we do is all the incoming freshmen are paired with an upperclassmen, not paired, but they're in groups.
Okay.
And they're led by an upperclassman who kind of, helps them get their foot in the door of college life, which is like, for someone for people who are similar to me,
Mm-hmm.
that could like make or break their college career. So I saw a lot of students who, were very like hesitant, very timid about starting college, especially like in the honors college. And then they kind of grew to themselves. So many of them are successful, and I fully believe that the program had a big thing to do with that.
Absolutely. Peer mentoring, co-mentoring, that peer leadership, it helps to humanize the experience too, is because that first couple of weeks, we all think, I'm going to college, I'm going to be great, and then you're sitting in your room like, I ain't got no friends. I want to go home. I want to go home where everybody knows my name, But to know that someone else is going through that experience, that someone went through that experience and they were able to overcome it, it really does help to say, well, I want to get to know you. I want to make sure that you matter. I remember my high school was 550 students. Remember, I went to a specialized magnet public high school, 9 through 12. That was not my graduating class. 9 through 12, 550 students. So I chose a college specifically because I said, I want to go to a college where nobody will know my name. I didn't want to be known. The same person I was sitting next to in 5th grade is who I graduated next to. I was like, I'm done with this. I want to go somewhere where no one. So I'm going to the University of Tennessee. They had sports. We didn't have sports in high school or middle school. I never had sports growing up. And I was like, I know, you are thinking back. You were like, didn't she say she was a cheerleader? Don't worry about that. We didn't have sports. I was cheering for academics. And so, I know somebody's head thought about that. Like, they were like, she said she was a cheerleader, but she didn't have any sports. We didn't have any sports. But that was what I thought I wanted, was to go to Tennessee and go where there was no one that was going to know me, that I would have some level of anonymity. I get there, and I'm like, oh, no one knows me. I knew no one. I went out of state, and it was a hard transition. And so I got involved with a peer leadership program. I got in a first-year studies course where it was a small group. It was a law professor, and who was my instructor, and I got friends. And so those are some very powerful things that understand that not everyone is coming to college with the same preparation, knowledge, experience, and how can we assist it. So that's a very good example. So thank you. So lastly, as I kind of finish this, Authors McNair, Ben-Simone, and Malcolm Paquet argue in their timely book, From Equity Talk to Equity Walk, that the equity journey begins with you. Change must happen individually before it can happen collectively. They say that people drive change, lead change, and sustain change. Lasting change happens when leaders understand both the meaning of equity and the meaning is represented through their personal values, beliefs, and actions. As I close, I want to make clear that educational equity is just one form of equity within the student's ecosystem. It is really incumbent on each of us to think about the ways in which educational equity intersects with social equity, health equity, economic justice, etc. Through this lecture series, you'll be able to learn more and see more connections of this over the rest of the semester. I encourage each of you to think about your sphere of influence and actively work to achieve educational equity. Thank you for your time.